Okay, so this video is geared towards talking about one of the most important parts of the Media Studies course, which is representation. Being able to discuss representation is an important skill that you'll be able to use in both GCSE and A-level across both coursework and exam topics. So it's very critical you understand what it is, but also how to discuss it effectively. So the first thing for us to talk about is what representation actually is. Representation is essentially the opinion that we form about characters in any given media text. This opinion can be created through many different things, so it can be down to the clothing a character wears, the type of accent they have, the sort of language they use. Even the skin colour a character has will make us form an opinion about them. And this opinion is their representation. The key really for us as media practitioners is to be able to break down all of the components that form this opinion and agree upon what the general consensus is for it. So, in order to talk about it adequately, the first thing we need to do is identify what representational issue we want to talk about in the media text. These generally fall within one of these 7 criteria. So you've got gender, age, class and status, which is not to be mixed up with wealth. Wealth can be a component of class and status, but it's generally how important someone is to be perceived in society, more than just how much money they have. You also have regional identity, which is where someone identifies themselves as coming from. So usually this would be, for example, someone born and raised in London would call themselves a Londoner. You have ability and disability, sexuality, and then ethnicity, which would be where their family originates from. So, when looking at one of the core texts in GCSE, for example, in this case it would be the This Girl Can poster, I can see very clearly that one of the key features of this poster is a large image of a female model. This for me means that the representational issue I would probably be most likely to discuss is gender. In this case, looking at the second core text, which is Quality Street, we can see there are men and women as very prominent figures within the poster, which also means I could discuss gender. However, looking at this poster, we can see that the man is very formally dressed and is clearly from quite either a wealthy background or is of a high class. This means that actually class and status could be something I would discuss as well. On top of that, we can also see that there is essentially a sexual interaction between the characters in that the girls are kissing the man on the cheek, so it could mean that even sexuality is something you could discuss for this poster as a representational issue. The key is for you to pick the one, or one, maybe in some cases 2, that you feel you can talk about in the most detail. So once you've picked what your representational issue is going to be, you need to describe the portrayal of the characters in the media text. Now, generally, this is just about describing how a character is shown to us in as much detail as possible. Ideally, using good language, good descriptors is very, very helpful in this. So I've put a list of different useful descriptors that you could use. There's obviously a huge amount there, but 2 that I find are very, very useful are subordinate and dominant. So dominant means powerful, means in charge, whereas subordinate means someone who is not in charge, in fact is being controlled or is below another character in the media text. So when jumping back to Quality Street, we could say, for example, looking at the issue of gender, that the male is clearly dominant because he is the centre figure and looks in charge and in control, and the women are actually subordinate to him because they're either side of him, they're clearly drawn to be behind him as well. Once you've described the way in which a character is represented, you actually need to evaluate that representation. By this, what I mean is you essentially tell the examiner what your opinion is of what this is saying about those characters. So again, there's a huge list of good terms that you could use, but essentially you want to decide, for example, whether something is conventional as in normal or unconventional as in different, or another thing that can be a very useful evaluation is whether something is progressive or regressive. Progressive means forward thinking, means modern, whereas regressive means backward thinking and old-fashioned. So in the example, jumping back to Quality Street once again, the fact that the male is dominant and the women are subordinate, I would say, is a very regressive standpoint. So the representation here is very regressive, as in old-fashioned. Now, it is very possible to apply this to all media formats. So as just one example, I'm just going to quickly put a video for the trailer for The Fault of Our Stars on the screen. Now, this is an interaction between the main character, Hazel Grace, and her parents. It's very important we listen to the dialogue in this clip.
You need to be a teenager.
If you want me to be a teenager, you don't send me to support group. You gotta give me a fake ID so that I can go to clubs and take pot.
You don't take pot?
That is the kind of thing I would know with a fake ID.
So what we can see here, as I say, is Hazel Grace discussing the use of recreational drugs with her parents. Now, the way in which she talks to them is very relaxed. It is not what we'd call stereotypical of how a child should interact with their parents when talking about, in this case, pot. And actually the parents joke about their own knowledge of it as well. This, I would say, shows Hazel Grace as quite a dominant character, but also this is a very progressive, a very modern representation of the interaction between the two different age groups. So in the case of this clip, when looking at step 1, which is identifying the representational issue, I would probably choose age, as Hazel Grace is clearly very young and the adults are much older. When moving on to step 2, describing the portrayal of the characters, I would say that Hazel Grace is actually very dominant. And then when making an evaluation of it, I would say that the interaction between all the characters is very progressive, because it is not common, or it is not an old-fashioned viewpoint rather, for the child to be portrayed as a dominant character within an interaction between older and younger individuals. Hopefully that video has helped, but essentially the key here is to work through the 3 stages. There is a worksheet on the system that you can go through as well that will help you.